I'd like to first let you know about one small misprint in the program. It's on the first page, and many of you sharp folks may have already caught it. His birth date was just 2 days ago, 4/26/28, and not September 26, 28. I wish you'd forgive my proofreading skills. I believe I was dazzled by the 3-year-old on the front cover. I came to the University of Iowa as a graduate student in cello in the fall of 1993. Because of the flooding, the School of Music was closed and classes were postponed. When the University Orchestra had its first rehearsal in the second week of September, James started the year, as he had many times, with the Academic Festival Overture of Brahms. About 15 minutes into the rehearsal, we got to rehearsal letter H, where there's a transition from cut time to 2/4, and James reached down to the inside of the first desk of cellos and set the new tempo perfectly with my sound. Our eyes met, and in that moment, I decided it was time for me to learn to conduct. I learned much later that James had warned my cello professor, Charles Wendt, to watch out for that one. He's trouble. I also learned that in the same moment that I decided to learn to conduct, James had decided that I wasn't going to be as much trouble as he initially thought. I began conducting studies shortly thereafter and was hired as orchestra librarian. On that occasion, I received the same concise directions as many of my predecessors. I only have 2 rules: tell the truth and pay attention. Over the years, I have had many powerful moments with James, like that very first rehearsal. It is important to understand that nearly every student, colleague, or audience member I have met has suffered at his hands some profound moment which may not have been life-changing, but certainly meaningful and lasting. James had an uncanny ability not only to conduct an electric rehearsal, but a dazzling performance. The remarkable consistency with which he got the piece all right was matched by the consistency with which people responded positively to him. He used to say, "You don't see stars every time." But one could hardly disagree with this. However, most of us have never met someone who so frequently caused a visceral response in so many. James Dixon was a kind, generous, honest, and fair man. He also possessed an extraordinary musicianship. While either set of qualities could be attributed solely to either innate or learned behavior, it was the case with James that all of these qualities were both involuntary and learned. Many people heard him speak of the teachers in Guthrie Center who nurtured him, or about the barber who hired him as a shine boy at age 11 and taught him how to work, or the veterinarian and his wife who invited him over every Sunday for dinner and radio, or about Dimitri Mitropoulos, who was an exemplary role model as both a musician and as a human being. There is no doubt that James was gifted. His legacy, however, is as firmly grounded in what he learned from his teachers, role models, and colleagues as it is in his great talent. What we have lost in his passing is nothing compared to what he has left us. In professional and university orchestras all over the country, Dixonisms are used for efficient and lively rehearsal. In studios of all kinds and levels across the country, musicianship principles are taught which were learned in rehearsal with the University of Iowa Symphony Orchestra. How many public school orchestra directors are there who learned what an orchestra should sound like in what is now the Dixon rehearsal room? We are his audience, his colleagues, his friends, and his students. And if we are to honor him, then we must continue to remember and share his lessons and his voice. Just less than a month ago, I had my last conducting lesson with James while he was in Mercy Hospital. It was about trusting the orchestra. If you expect them to do it, then they will do it. This lesson appears to be in conflict with another well-used phrase, just make them do it. The former is a function of something he firmly believed, that one must get the self out of it. The latter I see as simply practical. We need leaders, and not all leadership can be done invisibly. James also believed that it was important to know one's audience. He used to say, about 99% of the world doesn't care at all about what we do. Isn't that enemies enough? This brings me to his most important lesson. If we wonder how someone could get himself so much out of the process and still make such a personal connection with so many on so many different levels, then we must understand that it is the balance between opposing forces and perspectives which achieves greatness. In the microcosm of our musical world, how did he balance so well these opposing forces and achieve so much for so long? He did so by never forgetting what was at the core of his heart. He had a great love for music, and he understood that this was shared by all of us, and that it was this shared love of music which is our bond. James was horribly technophobic. One could say that he never met a CD player with which he could make a personal connection. He did, however, manage a working, if dysfunctional, relationship with a few cassette players. The cassette I am holding resided in San Francisco for a decade. It is a recording of the third Mahler slow movement, which he played for great artists, students, and friends, sometimes several times. He also played it for himself. He could have chosen any of his great performances to listen to and share, but he was most proud of this. It is true that James had a very personal connection to this piece. His mentor, Metropolis, died rehearsing the third Mahler. In the 30-plus years following Metropolis's death, he had never programmed it. What I hold is his first and last performance. What he said to people about this performance was something less personal. He said that the thing he was most proud of was that, with the exception of Mark Weiger on first oboe, it was an all-student orchestra. He rarely gave himself an A for a performance, but he gave himself one for the last movement of this symphony. And the orchestra, which was not by a long stretch the best instrument he had had at the University of Iowa, was one that made him truly proud. What we would like today is for James to share with us once again his enormous heart, and in doing so with his incomparable skill to bind us in our relishing of the past and our shared responsibility for the future. The bond is music.